I'm very happy to introduce Kim Scott from my neighboring state, Arizona. She's from Arizona State University. She graduated from Smith, worked for a while in Thailand in a camp for people who had been slaves. She brings that point of view and some other interesting work she's done over time at Hofstra to our conversation today. She works with the Compy Girls. And I'm very happy that Kimberley is with us. Please come, Kimberley.
Thank you. We often look to technology and say, well, isn't it better now with the advent of technology, with the increase of technological developments, 31% increase out of all STEM fields occur in technology, isn't it better, these issues of diversity? And what I'm here to argue and discuss with you is no, not necessarily. It's not better. In fact, with technology, the disparity has gotten worse. However, our understanding of the disparity needs to provide a more nuanced suggestion, where we need to think not only about race, or not only about ethnicity, or not only about language or immigration status, but about all those variables as intersecting. And so what I'd like to do with our time together is discuss what that looks like, or what that can look like, by first examining some reality bites. What does the landscape of our nation resemble now, and what is it going to, and those implications for technology, and also talk about more national reactions to diversity, what I think has been rather dense, and then to talk more specifically about our reaction in Arizona State University through a program that I have the honor of leading, Compy Girls. And then in the session that I just attended in the same room, there's a lot of dialogue, which was great. And so interrupt me along the way, and I want to leave enough time after we go over some takeaways to discuss what all this stuff means, Are there any Googlers in here? Any Google people? Any people? Yeah, okay, those two. Okay, good. So we're all teachers? Teachers? Yes? Okay, all right. In the United States, the whole idea of innovation in the past, going back to the turn of the century, often dealt with what we had. What we had in terms of wealth, what we had in terms of the type of technologies, what we had in terms of things. And it's argued, in my background is sociology, it's argued that we now have flat technology, that the distribution has been flattened to some extent. It's less pyramidal, it's less hierarchical. More people have access to technology than ever before. More people have access to the internet. More people have wealth than ever before, even with the economic downturn. So that who we are and what we are intersecting now. It's two things. And who we are as a nation has to deal with us being innovators. We are known globally for being innovators. And what we have is the ability to innovate. But what I want to argue is that we need to understand who we are from where we were and what we've done, so that we can innovate and have more innovators for the next century, for the next generation, for the next time. And so if we look, what I said in the teaser is to look at digital equity as something that needs to address more than just gender, more than just race alone, more than just one marker of our identity. So, the reality. The majority population is very, very quickly becoming the minority. And in particular, the white population is decreasing by about 20%, with an increase of people of color. Now, gender, however, which is really, really interesting, is maintaining itself, meaning girl babies outlive boy babies. It has to do with how girl babies can survive infantile diseases. And so we have always in this nation had a slightly higher population of women. But if we intersect that, we've always had a higher population of women. The U.S. Census projects that we will always continue to have a higher population of women, and we also have a higher population of people of color, then I deduce we're going to have an increase of women of color. Looking more specifically, using a Google app, if we see just the US population, this is just the regular US population. The increase for white Americans is exceptionally slow. That's a really slow moving dot going up. The increase of all the other populations, not that you can tell very clearly, is much larger, in particular the Hispanic population. That's what it looks like from 2008 to 2050. And then if we move down and look at the female population, increases, it's exactly what I just said. Where Hispanic women in particular are experiencing the greatest increase of population. Move this down a little bit. The Hispanic population, Hispanic females are experiencing the largest population growth, followed by Asian Americans with a 4% growth. African Americans only a 1% growth, and then Native Americans moving from 1.6 to 2% growth. And then if we look specifically at what's going on in our schools, nothing's too surprising. That the majority of kids of color are coming into our schools, 56%, and the majority of the kids of color are from low-income backgrounds. Unfortunately, kids of color who are from low-income backgrounds are 3 times more likely to attend a poor school. And we also know that if they attend a poor school, the greater the number of kids of color, the greater the number of kids from low-income backgrounds, the less likelihood that there are advanced computer science classes. Not that there aren't computer science classes, again, flattening of technology, but they're less advanced. The possibility of having AP computer science or having a computer science teacher who is a computer scientist is less likely with the increase of kids of color and the increase of low income. So if I start to put all these variables together, and if you're into statistics, you may say, well, those are from different data sets, and that's another project I'd like to work on. That's true. But if we just common sense put this together, we have an increase of people of color, we have an increase of women of color. People of color tend to have a greater likelihood of coming from low-income families. People who come from low-income families are 3 times more likely to attend a low-income school than their white counterparts. And then if you're in those type of schools, you are less likely to have advanced computer science classes. And putting that together, that means who's at the greatest disadvantage? It's our growing population of women of color from low-income backgrounds who are not able to have access to the advanced computer science classes. That's just reality bite number 2.
Or worse, are discouraged from taking the advanced comp sci.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And I'll talk about this. That's Stuck in the Shallow End by Jane Margulis and Joanna Good's work as well, that we are pushing them out in really both implicit and explicit ways. And so perfect segue that it's not that surprising, at least to some of us, these statistics. But oftentimes we obfuscate the issue and we focus just on gender. Well, if we intersect gender with race, we see that no one's really doing well if you're a person of color, but particularly if you are a woman of color. I can't even draw the line for Native American women PhD recipients. The last time a Native American woman earned her PhD in computer science was 2002, at least according to NSF standards. African American women and Hispanic women, again, despite the increase, and this is based on National Science Foundation 2008 data, despite the increase in these populations, women of color are not earning the PhD in computer science, and I'll talk a little bit more about why that is so. For men who are of color, again, these bars are not to give the impression that they're doing that much better. It's still very, very low. And so, as I promised, how do we tend to react to issues of diversity? I mean us as a society. We oftentimes use a deficient model, and Cynthia knows a lot about that. I'll introduce her in a moment. We also exclude. We also tend to neglect and do very weird things with supporting programs that don't seem to be very helpful, but we'll support them anyway. And then finally, we eliminate. We tend to eliminate, and I'll talk about that. But if we take all this together, I see this in my attempt to be cheeky, we're dense. Our approaches tend to be dense. They tend not to be very thoughtful. Again, we're not necessarily asking the right questions. And so in terms of deficit thinking, this idea that some populations, or those people, and I'm purposely using the term those people, they don't really want to do technology. They're not really interested in all that computer stuff. One of the sites that I work with is in a native community, the Gila River Indian community in Arizona, and I often, go around and I talk about Compy Girls, and inevitably someone asks me, wow, that's great that you're working with the Indians. That in and of itself is a problem. That you're working with the Indians because, they really need to learn how to use technology to capture their food, yeah, I frown too. Their recipes. And I looked and I say, there's much more we can do than capture their recipes. But again, just that notion of thinking that that's all there is within one of the oldest communities, civilizations in the world, and that technology is supposed to somehow not advance the community in ways that we can't even necessarily envision, but to romanticize the past, this notion of native culture is only about food and only about cultural rituals, is a good example of deficit thinking, and unfortunately something I hear over and over again. Because as teachers, and I used to be a 4th grade teacher in what was called a special needs school, is we say, well, those kids, because they're really not going to do anything with the technology other than use it for recipes or use it to capture dance or music, they don't really need the advanced stuff. We can just give them computers that sort of kind of work, like the cartoon says. Maybe the password is usable 1 or 2 days out of the week, or they can just share. Or we can do computers on a cart. I love that. Just do computers on a cart. That's good enough for them, because they're really not going to do anything more with it. Another example of, I think, how we as a society tend to view and address and challenge ourselves with the diversity is through exclusion. How many of us have had guests at our house that we really don't want to have? I'm a parent, and I find as a parent, oftentimes I have to be friends with my child's parents, and I don't want to. To be honest, these are not people I would normally be friends with, but I'm forced to because my child likes the little girl or boy. Well, what happens? We invite these people to our house with these parents or whomever, but we really don't want them to stay. Not very long. This goes to your point. And so we say things implicitly and explicitly. We may look at our watches. They may ask to take a tour, and you say, oh no, the upstairs is a mess. We are excluding them. They're disinvited guests. We create them as disinvited guests. And so Mia Ong, who is doing work at Turk, she's doing a fantastic study that's funded by the National Science Foundation called Inside the Double Bind. And she finds that part of the reason that women of color do not persist in computer science is because as they progress in their graduate degrees, the atmosphere becomes so chilly that the social interaction is a greater barrier than anything structural. So at undergraduate, women of color are tolerated. They're tolerated. It's okay, you're in this class, there's not that many of you anyway, so we'll put up with you. Masters, wait a minute, you're still here? Less invitations to participate in projects, fewer invitations to go to the professor's house, fewer opportunities to find out about internships. And then when you get to the PhD, if you survive that long, there are no invitations. There's a lot less networking. And then if there's a lot less networking, you really have got to steel yourself to the point of being called something other than a nice person in order to survive, more or less to succeed. Another reaction is neglect. And what I see as neglect is we tend to neglect the voices of the young people that we think don't know any better what's going on. And it relates back to the first one, deficit thinking. We tend to neglect what they know or their motivation for either choosing to participate or not choosing to participate. .diva did a really interesting study where they challenged that notion and broke down data according to race and gender. And what they found, which I think is very surprising to some of us, is that kids of color are just as motivated, in some cases more motivated, to enter computer science. This demonstrates that kids of color, these are kids who are going to college, and they were asked, what do you think would be a good major? Is computer science a good major? And overwhelmingly, students of color said yes. But as we saw earlier, that yes turns into not for me much later on. And I think part of the reason that it turns into not for me is, and it goes back to more the explicit type of challenges that we give to students, is we have very bizarre measures of success or digital equity. We use these quantitative measures. It's a question of how many African American students or African American girls or Latina girls access the internet. How many go on this particular site? How many actually are using particular apps, as opposed to what are they doing with them? If we change those measures around and explicitly told children, I'm not going to measure you or quantify you according to how much you do something, but what you do with it, maybe we'll see different results. And then support. I said earlier, we tend to support projects that don't necessarily think of the complexity of the issues. We tend to support projects that may say, they use catchphrases. They'll say, oh, we're going to work with underrepresented groups, or we're going to work with girls. And we put a lot of money into these projects without asking some vital questions. How are you going to engage the underrepresented groups in the process? How are you going to represent that engagement in a meaningful way? Fantastic graduate students, and I promised them I would say their names at Google, Christopher Geldis, Gautam Singh, and Angie Hinton. We are starting an analysis of the top schools in the nation that have a technology focus. So we looked at the US News and World Report, the top 100 high schools in the United States. Out of the top 100, there are 15 that are considered, or who are challenging kids on technology. They're focusing on technology. Out of the 15, we then looked at what are their website images, and how many of those images are diverse. How many are depicting girls, how many are depicting girls of color and boys and what have you. And so what do we see? There's an inequitable image representation. We love the top one. Chris he coded this one, the bald eagle death stare. That came up over and over and over again in this one particular website, the bald eagle death scare. In that particular website, and we took the names of the schools off, there wasn't one picture of students. Every single page was the bald eagle death stare and Laura and George Bush. Oh, okay, and this young African-American male. That's it. And then, if we look at the bottom one, which is from World War II, however, it appears on a website that we just downloaded 5 days ago, that same picture, it repeats over and over and over and over again on every page of the website. It doesn't depict children from today. It's the image from World War II. That's over and over and over again. And then we find a theme of racial ambiguity, where we coded that the majority of the 15 sites, they if they show girls, the girls are very light-skinned with very long hair. Very few African American girls. Absolutely zero Native American girls. Zero. Despite, again, the increase, as we saw in the demographics. So if we look at this, if I was a student and looking at these websites, again, the top 15 technology schools in the nation, this isn't very welcoming to me. And we know that particularly with identities and invitations and inclusion, this goes back to the theme, as I said, disinvited guests. I wouldn't feel very invited to apply more or less to feel that my voice and myself is being appreciated in these schools, in these spaces. And then finally, eliminate. We as adults, oftentimes, or at least I will say I oftentimes, we eliminate our own responsibility to the next population. And particularly when it comes to issues of diversity, we say, well, you know, I am going to make sure that the next generation is going to be colorblind. And I'm going to do that by not talking about race and ethnicity and gender. There's a great book called The Nurture Shock that just came out that investigated these ideas, which found that in particular white parents are hesitant to talk about race with their kids. And the hesitancy is because they don't know how to do it. Case in point, my child came home one day and said, and she always does this right before she's going to bed, of course, and she says to me that the little girls at school won't play with her. And I said, why not? And she said, because one little girl, white girl, told her it's because she has brown skin. And I said, oh, what do you mean? And she said, well, she said, I'm not going to, brown-skinned people should only play with brown-skinned people. And white-skinned people or light-skinned people should only play with light-skinned people. And I said, oh. And I said, well, what did you say about that? And she said, well, I told her that's not true. And I said, did you tell the teacher? Trying to be calm. And she said, no. And I said, why not? She said, because all the teacher would say is that's her choice. My child is 4. And this happened 2 months ago. So the story goes on. I went into the teacher and I said, calmly, I said,
calmly, I like that, calmly.
Yeah, I said, this is what happened. I said, you know, I see 2 issues. One is that there's a peer culture being constructed that the girls think play equates to excluding someone based on skin color. That's one point. I said, I see the second point is my child at 4 years old believes she can't go to the teacher as an advocate for her. I said the implications of this are far-reaching because we know by age 4 that kids start to make meaning of race. By age 3, they've made meaning already of gender. So my child at age 4 has already been told and is starting to understand that her place is that she should only stay with brown-skinned people. And again, relate this back to what we know about our understanding of technophobes and who are the PhD computer science innovators. That means my child at 4 is being taught that she shouldn't be a part of the bar graph that's going up and to earn her computer science PhD. So I said this to the teacher, and her response was, well, what do you think we should do? She said, this is your area. True, I'm sociology and gender equity. I said, yeah. I said, well, we need to have a community meeting. That's what we need to do. I said, so we need, she said, okay, you go ahead and call it. I said, fine. I'm not a shrinking violet, as you can tell. I said, fine, I'll call the meeting. So I did the parent meeting, and the parents, all of them came. They didn't know what it was about. So I said impromptu meeting.
Class or from the school?
From my daughter's school.
From your daughter?
Yeah.
They came to a meeting, the school came to the
Yes.
meeting? Or your child's class?
The child's class, parents in my child's class. So I just said impromptu parent meeting. They all came. And, you know, I said, this is the issue. The teacher said, well, Kim, do you want to begin? I said, okay. So I said, this is the issue. I see this as a community problem. What are we going to do about this? The first reaction, and I'll end the story with 2 reactions. The first reaction was, well, I used to call kids fat when I was in school, and they seemed to be fine. Okay. And then the second reaction was from the parent of the girl who actually started this, and he said, you know, my daughter came home the other day, and she did say kind of an odd thing. She said, you know, brown-skinned people should only marry brown-skinned people, and light-skinned people should only marry light-skinned people. And I asked her, why does she believe that? And she couldn't really articulate it. He said, you know, I may think that's so, but I never said that to her. I said, oh, okay. What happened in that story? And I make sure every time that I talk, I try to integrate that story because I think it's very powerful, because oftentimes the parents in the end said, we don't know how to talk about these issues.
And neither does the teacher.
And neither, yeah. God knows the teacher did not. Both people did not know how to talk about it, and they admitted it. So I take my hat off. I really do. I think that that was commendable to say, we don't know how to do it. Kim, help us. I don't have all the answers. And I said, it has to be a community. But we need to at least place ourselves within the problem. It's not good enough giving every child a laptop. It's not good enough to say, well, everyone's going to have internet access. What are we doing, us, as responsible individuals, whether we be an adult or a teacher or someone who believes calling a kid fat is okay? What are we doing in order to be reflective about our past practices and our present practices to make sure that it's not okay to do these things? And that it's not okay at age 4 to start the trajectory in thinking that you can't be part of the growing trend in technology. And so for our purposes, Compy Girls. I started this program. It's a National Science Foundation program. We're in year 2 of our 3 years. I often described it as a culturally relevant, year-round technology program for adolescent girls, grades 8 through 12 or ages 13 through 18. And we have 3 objectives. We use multimedia to increase the girls' computational thinking. We're interested in assuming a technosocial analytical lens so the girls can increase that, and to make it fun. And engaging. We have 6 classes that the girls get through, but the important thing about the classes is doing research. And so we ask the girls to identify a social and community issue, and we teach them ways to research the issue responsibly. So the technology becomes a means to that end. So their issues have ranged from consequences of early motherhood, peer sexual harassment, the OTOM language and culture loss, to teen pregnancy, child abuse. It varies.
I'm just looking at your website on it. Do you have any, I see that it's expanding in the school districts in your area. Do you have any interest in expanding your program beyond the state?
Yes, good question. I've learned there's a difference between strategic and opportunistic planning. And so I'm trying to be strategic and less opportunistic. And what I see is that Arizona is really interesting in the Southwest, and I'm not originally from there, is that our population increase is very similar to the nation in terms of our increase of Hispanic students, so not so much African American, but Native populations. And so what I'm looking to do is expand first in the Southwest region and then collect data in terms of our effectiveness there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that data, and then go outwards. So long answer, yes, but strategically I rather look at the population that's going to resemble the nation first before we go farther.
And then the second part of that question, I'm sure you've studied, are there other similar programs in other places similar to Compy Girls? It looks great.
Thank you. Good question. No. To the extent that Global Kids is close and Games for Change, however, we are solely focused on girls. We did have a Compy Boys. And I believe in collaboration and outsourcing those types of endeavors. That's all I'll say, Compy Boys. No. Only because it's girls only, because it's social justice, because it's multimedia, we're pretty much it nationally.
What were the 2 that you named?
There's Global Kids and Games for Change. There's also Digital Youth Network with Nicole Pinkert. She's moved to DePaul. She has within the Digital Youth Network a portion for girls, but our entire program is just girls. One of the things that we do...
I can't do this at school. They don't have programs like this. At my school, boys get more than girls do. They have basketball programs, field trips, and mentor meetings. At the end of my school year last year, they gave us this program as an option. The boys went to a Suns game, and we only had this one theme, and we took that as a reward to us for being there this year.
I think this is really interesting. We asked one of the young ladies, you know, why did you apply to Compy Girls? There is an application process. We've always been oversubscribed. We started in 2007. Why? Because I moved to Arizona in 2006. This is based on a program that I did in New York. And there's an application. We usually get 200 applicants for a cohort of 40. And we asked a young lady who's in the program now, why did you apply? What was the purpose of applying? Her answer, I think, is telling on two parts. One, she sees the gender inequity. She sees the boys get everything. But two, which is more disturbing to me, is this is a reward to us for being there this year. To learn technology, to hopefully increase her computational thinking, to learn skills and the papers, and they do have to write a paper at the end of every semester, and the paper is based on a PhD level paper where they have to have peer-reviewed articles, they need to have an introduction, they have to have a literature review, they have to have findings, they have to have methodologies, they have to have an analysis requirement. So for her to think this is a reward, I see that as problematic. This should be something that every child, and particularly, again, if we're interested, that's why I asked if there are any Googlers, if you want to hire people, you're not going to be able to hire only white males. That's the reality. They're not going to be there in the same numbers that there are now by 2050. That's the reality. So we need to change this thinking. She should feel entitled that this is a given, that she should have this program and that every child should have this program. One of the other key parts about our program is mentoring and the idea of self-determination. And what we mean by mentoring is we engage the girls in peer mentoring, as well as we have set up, and Cynthia can talk to this, an opportunity to partner with collaborative industries such as Intel or Google or whatever the need, to have individuals mentor our girls. So there's a mentoring change. It's the older girls mentoring the younger girls, older and perhaps they've been in the program longer, as well as surrounding industries to potentially mentor the girls there. And not only once, not only twice, not a visit here, visit there, but we're set up to provide, so it should be sustained over at least 2 years. The program is 2 years. And also the idea of self-determination, which is linked to mentoring. Self-determination, I'm not using it in the traditional Western sense, but using indigenous knowledge systems. What I mean by self-determination, I'm referencing in particular Brian Brayboy's work, who's a co-PI with me on this grant, is that once, in indigenous knowledge systems, once you gain a knowledge, or once you gain a new understanding of something, indigenous knowledge systems says that that's a gift that is supposed to be shared with the community, shared so that it advances the collective. So it's the self determining what to do with that gift that should benefit a group, much different than many notions of self-determination. And so that's how we have captured the idea of mentoring. It's not good enough for you to go through the 6 classes and then leave and say, I got mine. It's saying go through each class, and how can you work with someone who may not get it as well, or someone who's just starting, and then hopefully, collaboratively, that idea would be absorbed by the community.
Problem solvers are daily technology better. They come up with solutions every day that benefit our community.
One who's open-minded to create new things that the community hasn't seen or anybody in the world hasn't seen.
Providing support to the community to be able to help them to solve problems that they might not solve on their own.
I purposely didn't preface this because the young ladies were talking about computer scientists. Their understanding, after going through the program, and these are young ladies who have finished 1 year of the program, is that computer scientists are to help the community, are to support the community, are to create things that are going to benefit the community. How different than many people's notions of computer science. But I think due to our program, our young ladies are saying, well, yeah, computer scientist is about community. Of course.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
One of the coolest things, I was there that day when they videoed, so, those were all my girls, a lot of them. One of the things that struck me also was building on that sense of community. When the girls first came to the program, they talked a lot about that image of the computer scientist as that lone person kind of sitting in a dark room with the, with the light from the computer kind of, glistening off their pasty skin, and that single person working in front of their computer. And I think one of the things that the program does, building off that idea of community, is it really demonstrates to the girls that it's a collaborative effort. That, and that was something that I drew from the session that I was at previously about computational thinking. It's not a matter of individuals sitting at a desk by themselves tackling problems. It's a community of people who work together to solve problems that impact the larger community. And I think that's something that the girls maybe didn't necessarily verbalize in those, but they definitely believe.
Yeah.
There's something there.
And that's been a progression.
Mm-hmm.
And we have one more year with them. So just imagine what they're going to say. Yes, Susan.
Do you have a program for male computer science teachers to teach them that this is
important?
What is?
Yeah.
Because they don't run it from this perspective.
Oh, yes.
And they do their best
Yes.
to help the boys run the girls off.
Absolutely.
Yep.
That's too much of generalization.
Sorry,
I
it's
see
a
that.
generalization.
It's not all, and we do have, I didn't put as much in here, but Cynthia can talk about it because she went through the training. We have a very rigorous mentor-teacher training. And the individuals who are responsible for interacting with the girls, we have male computer science PhD majors or masters in computer science. And they've been very successful. We have not found that there's a difference between genders of who are the more successful mentor teachers. I don't think so at all. But we go through a lot of training. We counted up the number of hours that a mentor teacher in Compy Girls endures is about 170.
Endures? I'm in charge of the professional development.
Endures
is not the right
Well, they've
word.
used the word endure.
All right.
Yeah, the evaluation data says they say endure. It's 170. Yeah, it's a long period of time. And we are still tweaking what that should look like. That's Cynthia's job, is the curriculum specialist. They do an initial graduate student class called Social Justice, Technology, and Education. I teach it as a hybrid class, meaning we're in Second Life as well as in First Life. And we do a lot of theory and a lot of application of theory to what it means. And some of the concepts that I'm going over today, we protract that out for many, many, many weeks. But then we have trainings before each of the 6 classes. Each of those trainings is about 24 hours. And then we have meetings every week to talk about what works and what doesn't work in relationship to the theory. And then we have follow-up at the end of each of the 6 classes as to what didn't work, what didn't work. And then they have to meet with us individually. It is a lot of work, and not everyone, male or female, succeeds.
Some of the stuff with Jane Margolis, and I forget that woman who worked at the airport that's in you.
Joanna?
Is that some of the women lost students and some of the men lost students. And if you ask for student information, some had men and they loved them, and some had women and they didn't love them. So you can't. It has more to do with the training, I think, as you're trying to provide, that makes that difference.
Yeah. And it has to do with reconceptualizing. I think it has to do with starting with ourselves. I mean, culturally relevant computing, we have, we just wrote an article that's coming out in a site, one of their productions, it's 3-pronged. It starts with reflection. Reflection on the part of the adult, the teacher, saying, what do I think about not only computer science, but who do I think should be involved? And that takes a really long process, and it's a process, it's not something to do once or twice. The other part that we see culturally relevant computing, and we try to integrate within all our trainings, is asset building. And so getting mentor teachers to really believe in their heart of heart that the girls are coming with assets. That they're not, we have girls who've dropped out of school, we have girls who have babies, we have girls that have been written off by society. But to get mentor teachers to believe they still know a whole lot of stuff, and it's just as important as to what you know, and it can be used within technology, and technology can be used to inform it. And then the third thing that we talk about in culturally relevant computing has to deal with the next slide. It involves multidirectional relationships, and that it's about community building, and it's about teaching the girls that they are not only benefiting, but that they are accountable to something bigger than themselves, whether it be their community, whether it be the school, whether it be the teacher, other students, or parents. Because what we have found in culturally responsive pedagogical theory, and that's looking at some work by some scholars like Geneva Gay and Tyrone Howard and Gloria Ladson-Billings, is that if particularly kids of color who have been marginalized because of social class and gender, if they believe that they are accountable to something other than themselves, their academics go up, their achievement goes up, their sense of self goes up. So we've employed these ideas to Compy Girls, and particularly for technology, in both the training of our mentor teachers and the context, the community that we've attempted to create in our classroom. And we are an after-school and summer program. And we have some great examples. We are in Second Life. The last 3 classes, we ask the girls to resolve whatever issue they have been investigating and to build it within Second Life. This is our headquarters in Second Life. And just a side note, this was built, everything that we have within Second Life is built by one of our mentor teachers who does not fit the traditional sense of a computer scientist. She's a native woman, young, finished high school. That's it. She can program, she can write script, she can do anything when she thinks it's going to benefit the community. And not only that, she says, I don't mind doing more work because I'm going to teach the girls how to do it. As we said, the success of the program is not so much that it can continue where I'm in place or Cynthia's in place. The success is based on the girls taking over our jobs. That to me is success. That's sustainability. And so right now in Second Life, but particularly in Teen Second Life, this is in the inside of our headquarters, which you can visit. The tiger won't kick you off.
The tiger's gone.
Yeah, there was
no watch tiger anymore.
There was a watch tiger, so while we were building, which you can now go to the URL, the SL URL, and visit our headquarters and not be pushed into the ocean, is we have up the girls' posters on what they're currently working on, and this was just built a couple of days ago. And again, if you can see clearly, they're working on tough issues. They're working on issues that they've identified themselves, and they're looking forward to getting feedback from not only their community, which we have when we have closing ceremonies, where the girls showcase their work, but also getting feedback from people outside. So some takeaways is that how we look at diversity needs to be more nuanced. If you can read that, one man says, how can people say that we aren't a diverse group? We might look the same, but I happen to know that Gerald, for instance, wears a basque under his suit. And Gerald says, and I used to be called Maureen. And I use this cartoon because we need to think about diversity in different ways. We need to diversify our understanding of diversity. Again, it's not just about gender, it's not just about race, it's about who we are, and we are all made up of so many different identities. Mentoring. It's not good enough, in my mind, to mentor people once they've succeeded. We have to start the mentoring chain very, very early on. We need to see diamonds in a rough, and they're all diamonds in the rough, particularly that growing pool that, given our present infrastructure, we're draining. We're draining the increase of the women of color who are going to make up that pool. And unless we want to abdicate our position as the technological innovators that we have been known. We need to mentor. We mentor very early, as soon as kids can start to understand gender and understand race and understand their place in society. And that the mentoring needs to be collective. It can't just be Intel. It just can't be Google. It can't just be Microsoft. It should be a collective effort for mentoring. And then collaboration. It's not only about collaborating with individuals within our community, but crossing the community. I mentioned briefly, my background is sociology. I'm a professor of sociology in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Arizona State University. I'm not a computer scientist, but I have the good fortune to work with computer scientists who can break down to me, what Java and C++ looks like. I have the good fortune to work with individuals who are scholars on indigenous knowledge systems and Native communities, or to work with individuals who, and I didn't talk about this, who know how to construct really good evaluation so that we can see that the girls in our program are predominantly Hispanic, followed by an almost statistically impossible number of African American girls in the state of Arizona. It's almost impossible how we have 19% of the girls in Compy Girls African American.
That's every African American girl in high school in Arizona.
Almost, yeah. The population of African Americans in general is 3%. Population of K-12 is 5%. That's almost, and I don't do the recruiting, because I've been told I'm too old and I shouldn't go out. So it's not me who does the recruiting. So how did we get this number? I think it has to do with motivation. Just as Stuck in the Shallow End demonstrates, if it's available, if it's made available in a way that's inclusive and inviting, they're going to come. They're going to come. So we've been able to do this. That's our population, which is in complete opposition to, again, the computer science. And I must say, I'm really excited, half of our graduates, meaning we now have a small cohort of young ladies who graduated high school, half of those graduates, half of them, 50%, yay, actually want to program. They are now, half of those young ladies want to program, and let's see, a third of the half are taking a programming class this summer. We're paying for it. One of the reasons we asked them, why do you want to do programming? They said, because we get to be together. Going back to the point about collaboration. We've been able to be relatively successful. And our success demonstrates, again, that over time, because we're only in year 2 of 3, the girls in our program have increased in every measure, meaning how they see themselves technologically, socially, and academically. Hopefully these increases will continue. In comparison to a comparison group, and we do have comparison group data, the comparison group along these same lines is decreasing. That's normal. For any kids who are high school, they decrease in terms of how they see themselves. But our girls are increasing, which is not the norm. And I'd argue that the norm needs to, that abnormal needs to be the norm. And so I'm going to stop. Thank you very, very much. Please visit us on Second Life.